Hello, everybody, and welcome to the As You Are podcast. My name is Leslie Vandergens. I'm the founder of Ensō Coaching and Consulting, and I'm here with the full gang.
Yay.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Might be on very little sleep on a lot of our
I
behalfs
actually
today.
about 75 minutes cumulative for the last, 30 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
well,
Okay,
look
so
at that.
definitely the least.
Definitely the
So
least.
it's going to be a little unhinged.
Yeah.
We'll have to cut Kathleen off. We'll be
Yeah.
like, we're done, girl. Okay, so we're excited about this because Adam actually had this wonderful idea that we do a little series on us.
What?
Mhm.
Yeah, individually, not
What?
us all together,
Yeah.
but
Not us all together.
Yeah.
not us all together, but just, we'll do a little Adam, and then we'll do a little Libby, and then we'll do a little Kathleen, and then
little Leslie.
A little
Little
Leslie.
Leslie.
I'm excited because I am sure there are things that I am going to learn about each of you that I had no idea were the case,
I know.
even though we've known each other
Yes.
for so long.
Yes, I heartily agree. And then I'm just going to turn this around on myself real quickly.
Oh.
Because part of what I'm really excited for when it's my turn is what questions are going to be asked.
Yes.
Yes.
Exciting and terrifying.
No,
Yes.
I love some questions. So it's like, what am I going to learn about me through this too?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a coaching
I know.
session.
It is like a
What?
coaching
In the same way,
sesh.
we ask people questions they've never had to answer before.
Yeah, 3 against 1.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Three
Three against one.
Chance.
Du, du,
Or
du.
3 in support of 1.
That's right.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
The
Well,
hot
mostly.
seat
Mostly.
here.
Mostly.
That's
Maybe
right.
this is the supportive side. This is
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that runs in things, really.
And
You make your way on over here, Adam. You come on over here.
well, and
Evil laugh.
and I think there's to Adam's point of learning more about each other. We talk about this. Everybody has a journey. We are where we are, and there's just an opportunity for us to dig in a little bit with each other on where did we start, and then where are we today, and maybe what's next. What
Totally.
is the vision? What's the vision for the future? Where do we want to go? And and as much as we interview other leaders, we are also leading in so many different ways. And so it makes a lot of sense for us to talk to each other about what our path and what our journey has been and what
Yeah.
brought us to where we are today. So
Yeah.
I love it.
without further ado,
Well, when we were talking about
With further ado.
with further
No, a
ado,
little further ado.
when we were talking before the episode started about how to start the episode, Leslie, you brought up how do you tell your story?
Mhm.
And that's kind of a lot of what we do, I think, as
Yeah.
coaches is help people to discern, how do you tell your story in a way that is authentic and also that is applicable to the circumstance that you're in, right?
Right.
Because there's no one narrative for any of us.
yes,
And I think that's
and that you've chosen for yourself
Yeah.
versus one that has been thrust
Given to
upon
you
you
or-
through
That's right.
external mediums or
That's right.
whatever, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
So, without further ado,
Without
Without-
further
okay,
ado.
without further ado,
Now it's time.
Adam, victim uno.
Yes.
I guess the one who comes up with the concept
Yeah,
has to.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Great idea.
I know.
Great
Makes
idea.
sense.
So, let's go. All right. So, Adam,
Mhm.
A to M.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dumb.
Yes.
Nice.
There
M
we
is
go.
them,
The M
and in the middle.
in the middle.
Yeah. So, what's A? Where did you start?
I grew up in the tri-state area of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, about 5 minutes in on the Ohio side. So if people are unfamiliar with the geography of sort of that area of the kind of Midwest, a lot of people will call Pittsburgh the sort of last outpost of the East, or of the they'll call that area like the Mid-Atlantic. So where I grew up was a very undefined area in terms of, well, some people consider it the Midwest, some people consider it the Mid-Atlantic, some people still kind of consider it just the very edge of the East coast. And so that was, that's an interesting thing because in many ways, it's such a culturally pluralistic area in the sense that you have West Virginia, which is very rural, generally speaking. Then you have Pittsburgh was about, maybe 40 minutes from where I grew up. And so that very, obviously very industrial and post-industrial in many ways. And then I grew up, as I said, on the kind of 5 minutes on the inside of the Ohio border. And so a lot of just different kind of experiences to have growing up in that area along the Ohio River there. And one of the interesting things that is maybe a little unique about my experience there is that my family still owns and operates a small town funeral home, Robert's Funeral Home,
Yes.
in
Catchy.
Wellsville, Ohio. Yeah, catchy.
Yeah.
All the rage.
People are dying to get in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
But
Joke.
I wish I could take credit. I've heard it 5,000
Yeah.
times in life.
And in death.
And in death. That's right. In life and in death. So it is interesting to grow up in that kind of environment because, you know, people would always ask me, oh, is your life like 6 feet under? And the interesting thing is, no, because my life growing up in that environment was way more like not the story of, but the circumstance of, or the environment of. Did you ever see that movie called My Girl?
Oh my God. I knew you were going to bring it up.
I'm
I'm still not okay.
Dramatic
Glasses.
Dramatic.
He needs his glasses.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Yes.
It's the worst.
I'm still not okay, but yes.
Yes. That
Oof.
was much more the kind of environment that I grew up in, where you had like the Jamie Lee Curtis, you know,
Yeah.
people, everybody knew everybody in this little town. When I was growing up in Wellsville, there were probably maybe around 5,000 people. There were like 79 people in my high school graduating
wow.
class, very small.
Wow.
And there were actually at the time, and I think this is still true, but there were actually 2 funeral homes in a town that size, because in many ways they were sort of like embedded into the culture of the Midwest, very much in the way that you kind of see in My Girl, where everybody knows each other, you know, where the ladies down the street in the local hairdressing parlor, you know, were the ones who would come and do the hair for their clients, you know, and it was this very beautiful kind of circle of life thing. And I think that one of the things that it really taught me, now I did not grow up living in the building, although my grandparents did.
Oh, wow.
They lived upstairs in this building, and that is so common, so
Yeah.
common.
So crazy.
And
to me.
many of the people who I knew who were kids of funeral directors, they did grow up like in the home.
Wow.
And so we had a separate house, and so that was like, you know, a couple miles away. And so we did not. But I think that some of the lessons that I learned from that, and it's interesting because I actually about 10 years ago, I wrote an article for the Chronicle, the Austin Chronicle, on how growing up in that kind of environment influenced, I think, my work in the arts. But just in life in general, I think that like one of the probably most important lessons I learned in that circumstance was, because it was really, for most of the time, it was really my mom and my dad, and occasionally they might have like another kind of part-time employee. But I really learned from that experience that that if you are in a position that is in service to others, where it is an unknown time frame always, that you really have to sometimes set aside what your plans were in service to other people, while also still taking care of yourself and your family, of course, and finding ways to do that. But it is interesting when I think back about you know, how much my parents sacrificed on behalf of other people, because you just, it's very hard to make plans and things when you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you are in a community where literally almost every person that you are taking care of, say 85% of the people you're taking care of, you know their families. You're out there, you know, in the community, being communal with the people that you are now taking care of in one of the most sometimes unexpected and hardest moments of their lives. So it really taught me to think about how one can balance being in service to other people in that way, and that whole balance and tipping point where it's like, no, this is a time when we are the only people who can be there for this person, or I am the only person who can do this for this person, so I need to sacrifice this plan or this thought. But then how do I balance that and have so that you can be there for yourself and continue to be there for others, right? And that for me was a big part of that growing up, and just seeing how giving my parents were, but how they were still able to make such a great family dynamic work at the same time. That was a big part of it for me. You look like you were going to ask.
No, I'm there with you. And I'm thinking, right, like this is the same in sign language, that element of like having to be so selfless, but also still taking care of yourself in it. Like I was just thinking about the small town aspect that's like, you probably then know the people who've died. And so like you also potentially have your own mourning that's going on in the process while also needing to be there for the people who are most immediate to the grieving. And so being there, taking care of those things for others while also still like, what is your relationship to allowing yourself to mourn when you're having to put on that face?
That's so true. And not to get too dark with everything.
Please get dark.
Speaking of that area, that sort of tri-state area there, that West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania sort of post-industrial area, if people haven't visited that sort of region, steel and manufacturing of steel and things like that were big industries there. And so when the steel mills started to close, when I was probably, maybe in 6, 7, 8 through maybe, preteens, that was a huge aspect of most people's lives. Almost everybody I knew had a grandparent who worked in the steel mills, or certainly my grandparents did, or in the potteries or things like that. And so when all of that closed at the same time, there was this massive post-industrial depression of sort of almost ghost town, and as frequently happens in those kinds of circumstances, what came in was fentanyl. And so just the large amount. And so in the aspect of being in, end of life care, my sister, who now, largely sort of runs the operations and does a lot of the work at the funeral home. She, has now taken care of so many of her classmates, so many of my classmates. I mean, who have succumbed to addiction. And so it's kind of a crazy thing to be taking care of people who are your age, who you went to school with, and now you have embalmed, you have taken care of their families. Because of that, the massive prevalence of opioids and everything, and addiction in that area. Yeah. So it adds another layer to, as you said, the closeness and the mourning. And we literally went to prom together, or we, et cetera, et cetera. And now, here's that individual, and I'm taking care of them and their family. So it's a really distinctly interesting and sad but noble, I think, circumstance, harrowing circumstance that people find themselves in. And sometimes it's odd for me to think I'm a very small family, so I'm the only one who's not back there in that area, right? But it's interesting to think, oh my gosh, sometimes there's almost a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say I ever feel like guilt per se, but there's a little bit of like, I'm out doing the arts in, outside of that area, and not dealing with the day to day that of the fatigue and the weight of those sorts of circumstances. And they're all back there together, and still, fighting the good fight and doing all the amazing things on behalf of families and people, individuals, back in that area. Yeah. But it's interesting to be the one who's not there, and still trying to keep, the tabs and everything. And I get to go, I'm fortunate, I get to go back a lot, and spend time with them. but it's an odd circumstance, and it really makes you feel so grateful, for all the things.
Yeah.
And I love Pittsburgh as a city. I think it is such a crazy, amazing city, and Pittsburgh has had such a renaissance. A lot of people, when you say, "Oh, I'm from the Pittsburgh area," they're like, oh, they think of like Flashdance and like, you know what I mean? Like all of the
Which
like.
also good.
It's also
Yeah.
good. I know.
Right.
I'm like, you don't want to dance at like the
Come on now.
fake ballet school there.
Yeah.
It's actually the Carnegie Museum of Art where they do that final
I will
scene.
dance
They
there.
cleaned it all out and made it look like a dance room, I guess. But it is a great city. And so now so many of those post-industrial sort of like architectural things that were left from the steel mills, they have turned into like art installations that are lit and that are monuments in a way to that sort of the working class that built that city. But it has a phenomenal, and this was another thing I was so blessed with, to grow up in this phenomenal cultural scene. I mean, you do have like the big museums, like the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, the Carnegie Museum of Art, et cetera, et cetera. But you also have like the Andy Warhol Museum is there. Small little like cool museums. And then a lot of heritage sites and things that are, because there's a lot of Eastern European heritage in Pittsburgh. So it's very cool because in many ways, kind of like New York, Pittsburgh is a city that is comprised of little boroughs in a way. And so, if you're like, oh, I really like, I would love to go partake in this very Polish festival that is happening and eat the food and get to know people and the customs and the cultures, well, then you go to Bloomfield tonight. Or if you want to do, there's just so much, it's almost like a little Epcot in real life.
Cute.
That is, and so it's not only the sort of, museums in the sense that we think of like art, but it's also the cultural experiences, getting to know folks from other cultures and their rich backgrounds. I think all came together for me in a really, I think, it was a great place to grow up in that way, and then to see the other side of what can happen in those circumstances, and to be literally live in danger because of the place you live in or went to school. And I went to school in Youngstown, which is kind of a little bit of a Detroit on steroids, or a post to what we used to consider Detroit after the automobile industry, another circumstance like that. And just a difficult place to be, but you got that street education that was just every bit as empathy engendering as any other kind of education I think you could have had,
Yeah.
So an interesting thing. And then came to Austin
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so wait.
and met you lovely people.
Yeah. So go back to, so you talked about how with the funeral home and seeing how your parents were working, you really learned about this balance of like, how do I care for myself but also care for the community at the same time. What specifically did you take away from that you were like, I need to make sure that this is instilled in whatever I do going forward?
I think a big part of that was that two kind of things. One is that, so it was kind of by happenstance in a way, but my mom was an accountant. And my dad had gone into the Navy out in San Diego, lived his like wildlife out in San Diego before coming back to take over the family business, which my grandfather had been like the sort of like the funeral director, embalmer, and then my grandmother, his mom, had been sort of the accountant business person. And that ended up kind of being what ended up happening with my mom and dad. And so one of the things that I sort of saw growing up was, here are what my mom's gifts were and sort of how she contributed. Here are what my dad's gifts were and how he contributed. And that not everybody has to do everything. And
Right.
that was one thing that that if you can recognize what people enjoy doing and what they are good at doing and what they're willing and interested in growing to be better at doing. I think those were the things that I saw my parents kind of delegate amongst each or between each other. And the other thing is kind of an offshoot of that, which is, one of the ways that they were able to make sure that our family dynamic and everything they continued to want to do and support us in doing in life was achievable was when it would get to be too much of a load, work-wise, et cetera, then they would intentionally go out and seek people that had the same values, but that also would, that brought the skill sets that they needed. So delegating, basically, I guess, right? But they were very one of the things I always saw was they were very conscientious that but even before, to some degree, the skill set match, maybe somebody wasn't like the exact, this is exactly what we need versus what we already have. But if the values aligned and the personal values, the professional values, the ethos, if all of that aligned and enough of the other things aligned, they would find a way to make that work so that they could trust like going on a vacation or something and leaving that person because of, in charge, as it were, because of course, when you develop a place in a community like that, and then someone passes, say, and they're like, well, of course they always expected you would be the one to be there.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
so when you have people who are when you have people that can also get into the community, that you can trust, that the values align, then people would be a lot more like, oh, of course, like you need to go on vacation, and we totally trust this other individual to handle our loved one, our family member. Then it was that. For sure. How do you delegate? How do you get people on board that people are going to associate value-wise with what your values are? Especially, again, when you are, it's a very multifaceted occupation in the sense that, there's a lot of science, obviously, that goes behind it. There's a lot of law that goes behind it.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure.
There's a lot of, but then there's also the kind of grief counseling aspect that goes behind it. There's a lot of the, I will say the funeral world gets bashed a lot because there is a lot of stuff that goes on in some places where it's sell the most expensive casket, sell the most expensive vault, sell the most expensive circumstance. And I know it happens. I've had people who have been friends who have worked in that world who that's been the case. And I would see my parents say things like, you don't need that. Like, unless you want it, but people be like, well, our friends told us that that's like what we have to have in there. And, they would say, you don't have to have any of that. Like you can, it's available to you, but you might consider this if this might be a better trade-off or might be a better circumstance for you. And I didn't really realize, because you grew up in it, I didn't realize how kind of rare that is.
That's the way it is. Everyone's honest and truthful about their business.
Right, exactly. And they still even will, if somebody paid for, what they call a pre-need or a pre-arrangement or whatever, in 1970, they will still honor those prices now. Also very, very rare. So those sorts of things.
Buy my tomb right now.
Right.
How have you brought that
sweet
into
parents.
your?
Yeah,
I mean, how would you say
goodness.
those things that you've learned about? How have you brought that into your business now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those things to me is really, and this is always, and I'm sure it was for my parents and is for my parents and is for my sister, it's always a hard battle when you're considering things like pricing. When you are living in a time and in a city that is just going through the roof like Austin in terms of expense.
Yeah.
And yet you are trying to make things accessible and affordable for the people that you work with. So that's one of the reasons that I know we've talked about ACC on previous episodes and have lauded ACC and things like that. But it's one of the reasons that I have not completely gone out sort of on my own and develop, though there's still ways to do that accessibly, obviously, but to be in a place where accessibility is already a value, already has structures set up to support, instead of doing a sliding scale situation for people where I can say, okay, well, if a lot of other people and the institution take on a lot of the administrative work, I can keep my rate for vocal coaching, for example, at a certain level for a certain amount of time if other people are doing a lot of that work. And so partnering with ACC in this chapter of my life anyway is a way to, and the actor school at ACC is a way to try to keep things affordable for people, even though I probably could raise my rates across the board. That's not what I want to do ever. And of course, at some point it's going to have to happen
with the cost of living and
with cost of living and everything else. But I have really tried, and I do think that comes from that upbringing. I've really tried to be like, but this is community. This is so important for a lot of people. A lot of people have been with me for so many years, and I very much value that. And so, I recently started to then offer one-off coachings, which I hadn't done, really, and those are at a higher price. And for now, that's a way I can say, if you want to invest in a package, that's how I can keep it lower. If you need or want one-off coachings, this is a way that I can afford to live.
Yeah.
So it's and I'm always constantly thinking about, is there a way that I could now start to train other people to train some of the way that I do.
Yes.
Well, one way. But is there a way that I could start to do that as a way to always thinking maybe a step ahead of what when that inevitable time comes that the price increase has to come, when that inevitable time comes that a new situation needs to be the case or whatever, how might I have maybe tried to be a couple steps ahead of that and implemented something instead of being reactive in the moment? Because we all know that it happens. Like, I mean, whenever you live in a big city, I mean, not even just living in a big city, but it happens
anywhere. Right now, anywhere.
Anywhere. It's so expensive. So that to me is one way that I've brought that in, I think. And then also just remembering that you can't be all things to all people all the time.
Absolutely.
All the
Including
time.
yourself.
So
Yeah,
why did Adam, I'm asking a why question because I gotta know. Why did Adam say, funeral home, business, not for me?
Yeah.
I was wondering about this
okay,
too.
This is the funniest thing, and people always laugh when I answer this, because I did not want to be an entrepreneur.
Oh, what? And we laugh. We laugh because that is what he does.
Yeah.
Totally.
What?
Interesting.
Tell
us more.
Ever since I was little, I wanted to work for institutions. I was not interested in all of the goings on in the business side of things. I was not interested in bookkeeping. I was not interested in the administrative sort of side of all of that. And I knew I didn't want to continue to live in that area. I mean, I would have been very happy to live in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is difficult for someone like me who can't drive anymore because of my vision disorder. Just because it's a funny thing. There's so many bridges in Pittsburgh that it takes you forever to get anywhere, and so the public transportation is not very good. I would feel much, even in my circumstance, I would feel much more comfortable moving to LA to get around, with Lyft and Uber and things, than I would in Pittsburgh, because it's just such a hard network of cities or of little areas. But I could drive when I was there, so it was okay. But in any case, I just knew that I thought I wanted to be in academia. I thought I wanted to be full-time faculty at university until I was like, oh, talk about bureaucracy. But in any case, I went to grad school in Tallahassee to do a master's in music theory, thinking I'm going to be in academia. Came over here to do a PhD in music theory, thinking I'm going to be in academia. And then when I moved to Austin, and I did do 2 years at UT in a doctoral program, it was during that time that I got the opportunity to take over several different programs from someone who was here, who had, when Austin Music Theater disbanded, he had been working with their education department and everything. And so he had decided that his time in Austin was coming to an end. He was going to go back to Anaheim and go back to choreographing for Disney. And so would I be interested in taking over all of these different sorts of things that he had built at the time? And I did. And that was what then propelled things in addition to having taken a course in grad school at UT that had nothing to do with my music theory degree, vocal pedagogy, because I had never done vocal coaching. I had never done anything. I had done musical direction, but I'd never done anything like that.
So funny.
Until I came to UT, still thinking I was going to be in academia.
Yeah.
And then when I realized this is not that way of doing the arts is not for me, particularly in a completely academic field like music theory. That's the thing. It was just I was oh, I understand now the difference between and you would go to conferences in music theory and virtually never hear music played. There's calculus, trig, all this. And I was that is great, truly great for people who that is their passion. I just knew it was not going to be mine. There's also this very I don't know if it's changed. I haven't kept up with it for 20 years. But there is at the time there was very much you want to analyze musical theater music. That's
boo.
Correct. So that was a no. And I was I'm just not, I learned about myself also then, I think that there are people who are 80-20 people who will be I am so passionate about this 20% that I will do 80% of stuff that I'm not that interested in order to, and that was actually Jim Bueller, my doctoral advisor at UT, was the one who, he was I might not be quite as interested in this 80% of the literature that I publish about, but so I can do my 20%. That was a real eye-opener for me because I was oh, I've never thought about that, but I know I'm not that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was when things turned to sort of the voice world, and the voice world was what kind of made me an entrepreneur in a way, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's funny because I still in no way do I think of myself as an entrepreneur, because I think oh my gosh, I still work for other people mostly. But it is entrepreneurial in the sense that you are going toward those things, you know what I mean? So it's just a very interesting, that was the primary reason, because actually I very much, I certainly was not disinterested in any of the sort of funeral end of life world at all. And in fact, I'm a project right now is working on this book about end of life and arts organizations, because there is almost no data-driven, evidence-based research that is out there about, number one, is it even possible to answer the question, when is the writing on the wall for an arts organization? Is that are there potential markers that we can look toward? Because it's very difficult. I mean, I've been involved in closing many organizations, and the hardest thing is when you are so certain, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the impact, when you look at what would it mean for us to withdraw from the community that we've built, what resources are still available for the constituency, and things like that. But the hardest thing is to convince other people that you are not failing,
Right. Yeah. Right.
to close, and that look at all of these things that we have done, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is a big question that is out there for people. And so in many ways, full circle for me, this is a way to bring
A little bit
that-
of
I know.
that
It's
world
what the
up,
obituary
bringing-
becomes, right?
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly.
Obituary.
Right. And hospice.
Yep.
And it's interesting because I was just reading, and I'm not even going to, I feel bad because I'm not even going to be able to credit this person because I don't remember the name, but there's this interesting study that someone did. And it was on looking at the closure of nonprofit organizations. And what this researcher did was looked at, I don't remember how many different organizations. I'm so bad at citing the study clearly, but the concept was very interesting. And it was, what they wanted to look at was the wording and the rhetoric that was used around closure and how that affected employees' perceptions of closing that nonprofit.
Yeah.
So euphemistic terms like we're sunsetting versus, and so they had people implement these very specific phrases in the closure of these different organizations. So sunsetting versus dying.
Yeah.
And so it's just all of the stuff that's out there is very interesting, but it's not been applied except for one very specific study to arts organizations.
Yeah.
And, is hospice for an arts organization the right way to think about it? And or like, if it is or it's not, when is it? And when it's not, and things like that. So that's kind of my little way of still being in part of academia,
Right,
and still way of being part of
the funeral.
We always all together, right?
To
Bring all the
to
pieces
come back.
together.
That's it. To bring all the pieces together. And it's interesting because I thought when I would talk to colleagues in the arts world about this project, people would be like, "Oh, we don't want to think about that. We want to think." There's tons of research about how to maintain, or how to turn around, or how to
start.
And the funny, and it very much surprised me that people were like, "Oh my gosh, is that not like needed?"
Gaffling over here because it's like it's also needed for humans. It's also needed for everybody's end of life, right? That it's like, how can we do this peacefully, demystifying with inclusion and understanding? Like, absolutely, how much more powerful it is to name something versus ignore it.
Yes. And the death doula movement,
all of
these different ways that people can take agency over their own process.
I think in any kind of transition, right? Like
Totally.
in any life transition, whether it's transitioning out of a role or, leaving a toxic company, like how do you do that with dignity and class and grace and choice and all of those things.
Yes,
absolutely.
100%. Yeah. So that's kind of my full circle way of, thinking about all of this. And it is very interesting. It's tricky because there is so little to base any of this on. But one of the stats that's out there is that 50% of nonprofits organizations and nonprofit arts organizations in the US did whatever word you want to say, close, transition, post-COVID. So it is you're talking about literally half.
Absolutely.
And so I think having the data to support, it is a timely thing to be looking at because I'm pretty sure that how we would have this conversation pre-COVID and post-COVID would have been totally different regardless. So it's a new era. And I think that the beauty of it is, to everything there is a season. And we talk about seasons a lot in the arts world, in a different kind of way. But we've probably all sat in those meetings in the business world where we say, where are we on our organizational trajectory, right?
Right.
And the interesting thing is the last step of all of that is almost on that famous chart of that arc is almost always regeneration. It never seems to
innovation, rethink.
It never seems to have an option to be like, okay,
and then it's done.
Transition out of this,
all done,
and into the next,
right.
And I think that there's beauty in that, and I think there's a lot of lost opportunity in the not even necessarily unwillingness, because we all have cognitive bias and everything too, but just the, I'm interested to know, for example, this is one of the questions that has come up in this book project. If the government, for example, just throwing this out there, when you apply for nonprofit status, if there were a requirement, and I don't know what this would look like, and I'm not saying let's overregulate arts organizations or anything like that, but let's just say there were somehow a requirement, or maybe when you applied for grants as a startup, just to think about and maybe propose an end of life, whatever that would look like. Process or ethos or philosophy, if this were to happen. if for no other reason to put it in people's minds that is a natural part of an organizational lifespan.
Right.
It doesn't mean there's a lot of superstition around putting out there into the world too. If I talk about it, that's a big reason that I saw with the funeral home and everything that people would not talk about it. If I talk about it, it's going to happen tomorrow.
Right, exactly.
And that is just obviously not true. And
sorry if it happens tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
We just put it out there.
Right.
It's happening.
But how do we set up circumstances where people feel more confident and comfortable? And sometimes I think just putting out there, we just like to know what a plan might be. Rough around the edges way of thinking about this. When do you engage your board? When do you, et cetera, just to think about it.
Well, I just wonder how much, in addition to that, by causing a human to name it or to communicate it or to envision it, that it somehow removes ego. Because I do think, there, as you're talking about all of this, like the immediate thought that comes to my mind is, where does the human need for significance come into play?
Yes.
And like, how does that become a bigger factor than the actual health of the organization in the moment, right? And so I'm just curious, like, you?
Yeah, this is your book.
The royal
But how does one allow for a little bit of like dissociation with the identity that's attached to, I started this nonprofit, I'm passionate about it, I want to continue to making this grow. If I don't, it's a failure.
What does that say about me?
100%, or going to the board and saying it's time to close the doors because I suck, or whatever, right? Like there's a lot that I think is weighted to that. And how do you create a place or an opportunity for somebody to be able to kind of have, exactly. Emotionally.
Yeah.
Right?
Emotionally,
it's a business.
It is a business.
It's not emotion.
You are not the business.
Yeah,
right?
You are not the business, or you are not, I think about, I've been a part of a lot of places of faith that have closed their doors. But if the church, we'll put it that way in this context, I guess, if the church is in the world, or it ostensibly is meant to be in the world, then there are no doors
100%
to close.
Right.
And there is paperwork to file.
Right.
And I guess I had never, in this last church I had been at for 15 years as the director of music. And this church just ceased its operations on paper, I will say, back in December of this past year. Now, this was a very small congregation that it was made up of folks who had been there for 40, 50 years. And one of the things I really, really learned in this congregation and in the process of closure was how much people in general have such a connection to place and space. Because I don't think that is as true for me as it is for most people necessarily. And as they were having these conversations about closure, so much of it came back to the building. And I thought to myself, for me as a person, that's probably one of the last things on my list that I tend to think about. But then I'm like, but for maybe even most people, what's going to happen to the building? What's going to happen to the space
the
that
gathering
we
place.
have
That is
have put our
culture.
weekends into,
100%.
that we have put our finances into, that we have done with all of that. And one of the beautiful things that is happening, at least in this moment, with that building is it's turning into a new music venue.
Oh.
And I cannot tell you the relief that I saw on those congregants' faces.
Yeah.
As soon as that was announced, it was the sadness. I'm not saying there wasn't still obviously there was sadness, but that there was a purpose for this place and this space.
Love that.
The relief, the smiles, the excitement over what this gathering place was going to become. And so I think intentionality, because one of the things that I had talked about with them in meetings and things, because I was not a member of the church, but I was very obviously kind of within the fabric of the space. And, I said, this conversation, in my opinion, is probably going to, if it doesn't happen now, it's going to happen 10 years from now. Do you want to have agency in how it happens? Or do you want other people to have agency
100%.
in how it happens? And I do kind of think that perhaps that thought was a little bit of a turning point for some people, thinking about, I can still have,
I can choose this.
I can still be part of this choice. I was part of building this. AIDS Services of Austin, blossomed at this church when no one else would touch it as a ministry. The Rape Crisis Center, when no one else would touch it as a ministry. And so it's so easy to think, well, we're failing because we're closing. But look at these.
Look what you've done.
Look at what you've done. And we'll continue to do in the world.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And we'll continue to do in the world. And I see, Tilt Performance Group, the disability-focused theater company. They are out there doing things in the world.
Yeah.
The company members out there acting, out there creating new festivals.
I was just going to bring that up.
Right? That is the continuation. Yeah. Is it still, registered with the Secretary of State? Is it still something that people donate to Tilt Performance Group, according to the IRS? Yeah. No. Does that mean that life cycle is the circle of life? It is. It is maybe even more visible and a thing than it was when it was Tilt.
Yeah, something that's making me think with running with that too is by having the disruption of the space or what you've done, having to then keep with that purpose and intentionality that well, then what are you taking with you? What are you going to now go out and create?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's you're not going to recreate the whole thing. That's one, just not going to happen.
Right.
But it also speaks to what is important to you about this thing and how are you now making that someplace else?
Yes.
It's almost more abundant in that way, right?
Well, and even thinking back
use that
to
word abundant.
Thinking back to your beginnings, everyone has pieces that you didn't follow the exact path that was everyone for your family has kind of done this career path. You said, I'm going to do something else. But of course, you take pieces, right, with you into everything that you do.
Yes.
And
then when we die, it's
Yes.
a big old beautiful picture.
It really
That's
is.
the hope.
Full of
That's the
life.
hope.
Right?
Yeah.
And I want to say just one other thing, and piggybacking off of what you just said, Libby, which is that one of the things I always also remember, and this is a big thing that I sometimes forget to say that I took from that growing up and from my parents. My parents were so proactive from when we were little kids because they knew we grew up around the funeral home. We grew up with seeing that, grandma and grandpa had the business and then my parents had the business. And they were so proactive with us both from a young age and saying, just so you know, you should never feel obligated or feel like you need to or have to take this over. That is our life. It does not need to be your life. Never feel like the legacy is important. Never feel in that way. Never feel like this is what you have to do. And my dad jokingly would say something along the lines of, as long as it makes you happy and it's semi-legal. But it really, and so I always try to remember that because especially when you work with high school kids, very frequently, I learned after a couple of years of doing that there would be kids who'd be like, oh, well, I thought you'd be disappointed if I didn't pursue this.
Oh yeah.
I thought it wouldn't, I thought, you spent so much time teaching me that I thought if I didn't do this thing. And so I would think back to that and then be like, no, be proactive and be like, hey, I just want to tell you, as you're going on this college audition process, you literally cannot do it for anybody but yourself. And if you go be whatever, it is irrelevant as long as you are happy and a contributor, whatever that means to you. It could be contributing to yourself, whatever, and so that, I think that's a big one. And I think that comes back to managing, an organization and working with employees, and things like that. Again, how do I find what someone enjoys doing or would enjoy growing to learn to do, but not because it's what I enjoy doing or enjoy growing to learn to do.
Mama Papa Roberts.
Clap.
So good.
Or something. And then I think,
it's so good.
Yeah,
it's such a good lesson, right?
I think so. And then just also as a person of faith myself, I think growing up in an environment where, I mean, for sure that small town and its sort of like surrounding areas, while I got to grow up with a lot of different cultural influences, I did not necessarily get to grow up with a lot of sort of variety of faith-based influences. Very sort of Protestant, Catholic, or neither.
That was it.
In that immediate area. Now, obviously, Pittsburgh has but that was not my immediate, community, of course. And so, but seeing again how people could come together in an ecumenical way, and learn from one another and commune with one another in a way across even faith distinctions, I would say, because faith was such a cornerstone, like it is of many small Midwestern towns, of that community. And so being able to carry that on into working, ecumenically in faith-based organizations, institutions, places of worship, things like that. All of it, I think, is a puzzle piece, and I think that I can't wait to hear, how it's so nature and nurture. It's so nature and nurture.
I love it. Yeah. You got to tell us why music?
Yeah.
Ooh.
That is because this is a faster answer. That is because, when I was like 8 or 9, I remember, I really remember this moment. My mom, they were looking for, I guess I didn't have many interests or thing. And, like you look for activities for your kids and they're like, well, we tried this. Sports certainly was not it for moi. And that was evident very clearly.
Hey, me too.
Very early on.
Same.
Yes. And so, my mom, I think they were just like, what, piano lessons maybe? Like that. I do not come at all from a family of artists. In the sense that like restorative art,
100%.
art is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Creative. Yeah.
Yes.
But in the performing arts, I guess.
Right.
And they, and so I think they were just like piano, and I hated it when I started.
Suck at piano.
Yeah, I was like, no, so I quit. And then, but it was very much like a teacher thing. I think, and someone who just was like needed to be working with like adults and not with kids.
Good.
In the sense that like it was somebody
Such
who
a
was
good
like
message.
more,
Such a good reminder.
not a fundamentals person. Let's put it that way. And so then when I got in with somebody who was a fundamentals person, then I didn't stop after that and then continued that way. But then that first piano teacher and my high school band director are why. Music. I'll say Betty Prince and Barb Figger. They were the two. They are the why music for sure. Because I just, like many people grew up. I mean, I started in college as an instrumental music ed major, and like after 2 weeks switched because realized like, oh right, that means
do I want to be a band
means,
director?
That's right.
Yeah. Marching band.
I love that. That's exactly it. And
I know some marching band directors.
Yeah, hey, God bless the marching band directors and people who have the passion for that. Like Friday Night Lights was not my passion.
Right.
And I also it was not what I was not what I was into. But the band director was also the musical director at the local community theater. So that's how I got into
Small
like
town,
a lot
everyone
of
does everything.
That's exactly it, right? So those two and she would, and of course you don't know these kinds of things when you're in high school, but she would stay after school for hours and hours and like do these ensembles and things that I'm sure she was getting no compensation for. But just seeing someone who, cared enough to do that. And in a school district that is was very disadvantaged, in terms of opportunities, it's not like, I mean, obviously there's it was not a circumstance where people were coming in to teach lessons from like grad students or things like that or anything like that. She literally taught everybody. It's like Harold Hill. She literally taught everybody in that town to play their instrument because she was the only one.
Oh.
And so the band that they had, I was like, wow, when you think back to that like high school band, I mean, was it like the most awesome? Like, no, but the fact that they could put those instruments to their mouth and like play notes that like, that's really impressive because it all came really at the end of the day from one person.
Yeah.
So great.
Oh, absolutely.
The importance of having the right people around you.
Yes.
Everyone has that person.
You never know what could be inspired.
You never know.
You never know.
And if I were to pluck out some like big themes for me that is coming out of this conversation is also like challenging what we see as success.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth? It really is. It really is. And and also just the success, like in light of the status quo of your industry, right?
Yeah,
because people always assume that like, oh, were you a performer? Did you? And I was like, not really, actually, because it's not what was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we all probably started as performers at some point because that's how else do you really get into it most of the time. But once I got in that other side, I was like, oh, this is where like I'm at home, interested. This is me. And that is exactly what you say. It's getting into the place where you feel home.
Yes. Ooh, I love it. Getting to the place when you feel home, and I'm just going to keep like weaving and grinding.
Weaving and grinding.
Weaving and grinding. I was like,
not two verbs one
like,
often hears together.
Someone,
but it sounds
I was
like a
if
great
it's not
musical.
me, I need someone else.
That's our Ensō musical.
That is weaving and grinding. I'm reading the Sexy Dragon books right now.
Right.
No, but I just think coming back to the like what is success and how we talked also about like the writing on the wall with a business that like success is also knowing when to pivot. Success is knowing when to like 100%. Put new direction into something. It's not linear, right? And like what we take with us from different moments. Dying is not a failure, right?
We all will.
We all
will.
Not me.
So how can it be?
Yeah, no, exactly. So it's like, so like that's part of how we should look at success. It's not the end. It's the like, what are we doing in there? And how do we also, I think, make sure that like what it is that we're doing aligns with our own purpose and values.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think my very favorite, and I butcher it every time. I really need to etch this in my brain because it's weird to say my very favorite quote. I should, yeah. My very favorite quote of all time is, but I don't say it correctly.
But it's my favorite.
But it's the one that everybody's heard, and I love it so much, which is everything works out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end.
Oh, I thought it was going to be You're Dead.
Nice. Yeah, You're Dead. Welcome to the other side.
That's the book. Yeah,
I know. That's everything.
Right.
There's the quote for your book. Or You're Dead. Coined by yourself.
Yeah, right. Yeah, You're Dead.
You quote yourself.
Let's quote ourselves. Let's start that.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
That's right. There you go. See, you're much better. You would be much better at that than me.
Yeah. I mean,
I love that though.
I do. I love all of it. And again, I think the like, let's name the things, people.
Let's name the things.
And define it for yourself and
it.
take agency and call your own fucking shots.
Again, at the same time as we name the things, I think that does not have to take. This is somebody in a voice forum the other day. I think the Voice Geeks forum, which tells you like
that's all I need to know.
said the other day, like, because obviously that forum is very much about voice science, and somebody said, and I thought this was such a great observation. Do we have to prove everything about the voice? I think that naming things also does not have to take away from the mysticism around and the mystery. One of my favorite, in the Protestant tradition, whether you call it communion or Eucharist, there's a liturgy line that in many churches says, talks about the mystery of faith. And I think that logic and science and fact and truth and all of those things does not have to mean that we now have to strip everything from mystery and
100%.
mysticism and all of those things. And so I think that's where the then for me is really beautiful, is let's name it. Let's acknowledge it. Let's plan for it. And at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to footnote and explain every component about everything.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the writing on the wall really did just come from the ghost.
Yeah. That's it. Right? Shakespeare knew?
Mm.
Slash all those people.
Adam Roberts.
Slash, yeah. William Shakespeare, Adam
Was that
Roberts.
Shakespeare or Adam Roberts? I don't know.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Well,
Got some
And with
abridged.
that-
He's a
Yeah.
musician and a writer.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I've learned.
Well,
We love
we're
you
at
so
time,
much.
but this is
I
good.
know.
I have like
They're
more
fun.
questions for
Always.
you.
I have so many.
It's
We need part 2.
I want part 80.
Yeah. We'll just keep doing these until you guys are
I
like,
know,
please
exactly.
stop talking about.
Well, but it's these conversations
It's so
that are
good.
the empirical basis for all of the. That's
Today.
another thing. Everything doesn't have to be
done.
numerical data.
Yeah.
No, this has to be by virtue of the topic and the idea. It has to be ongoing always and
Right.
shifting always.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Even though-
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's these,
It's all unique.
conversations.
Yeah.
You know,
Everything's
Yeah.
unique. Everything's
Yeah.
put together in a way
It
that it
is.
should.
It
Right.
is.
And even though this
I love it.
podcast will end, the work will continue.
That's it.
Thank you. And
That's
with that,
And with that,
Good.
thank you, Kathleen.
Nice wrap up.
thank you, Adam.
Queen of
Thank you,
segues.
Adam.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
We
Fun.
love you.
Yes.
We love you
We
from
love
A
you.
to
So
M.
love
special.
We
you.
love you.
And you, and you, and you.
And you, and you, and you.
All right. Thank you guys. We'll be back for another segment.
Yeah.
Episode?
Surprise.
Episode. Yeah,
Episode.
surprise.
Yeah,
Right.
surprise. Who will it be? You'll never know.
We're just rolling.
That's it.
That's it.
And as always, please subscribe to the As You Are podcast on all platforms.
As you are.
As you
And come
are.
as you are, just like Adam did. He was just as he was.
As he
Try.
is.
The
Yeah.
only way, really.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.